to live as a lodger in the back sitting-room of the house, number 7. He was a boy about 12 years old. His name was Marco Lauriston, and he was the kind of boy people look at a second time when they have looked at him once. In the first place, he was a very big boy, tall for his years, and with a particularly strong frame. His shoulders were broad and his arms and legs were long and powerful. He was quite used to hearing people say as they glanced at him, "What a fine big lad!" And then they always looked again at his face. It was not an English face, or an American one. It was very dark in colouring. His features were strong. His black hair grew on his head like a mat. His eyes were large and deep-set, and looked out between thick, straight black lashes. He was as un-English a boy as one could imagine, and an observing person would have been struck at once by a sort of silent look expressed by his whole face, a look which suggested that he was not a boy who talked much. This look was especially noticeable this morning as he stood before the iron railings. The things he was thinking of were of a kind likely to bring to the face of a 12-year-old boy an unboyish expression. He was thinking of the long, hurried journey he and his father and their old soldier servant, Lazarus, had made during the last few days. The journey from Russia. Cramped in a close third-class railway carriage, they had dashed across the continent as if something important or terrible were driving them. And here they were, settled in London as if they were going to live forever at number 7 Philibert Place. He knew, however, that though they might stay a year, it was just as probable that in the middle of some night his father or Lazarus might wake him from his sleep and say, "Get up, dress yourself quickly, we must go at once." A few days later, he might be in St. Petersburg, Berlin, Vienna, or Budapest, huddled away in some poor little house as shabby and comfortless as number 7 Philibert Place. He passed his hand over his forehead as he thought of it and watched the buses. His strange life and his close association with his father had made him much older than his years. But he was only a boy, after all, and the mystery of things sometimes weighed heavily upon him and set him to deep wondering. In not one of the many countries he knew had he ever met a boy whose life was in the least like his own. Other boys had homes in which they spent year after year. They went to school regularly and played with other boys and talked openly of the things which happened to them and the journeys they made. When he remained in a place long enough to make a few boy friends, he knew he must never forget that his whole existence was a sort of secret whose safety depended upon his own silence and discretion. This was because of the promise he had made to his father, and they had been the first thing he remembered. Not that he had ever regretted anything connected with his father. He threw his black head up as he thought of that. None of the other boys had such a father, not one of them. His father was his idol and his chief. He had scarcely ever seen him when his clothes had not been poor and shabby, but he had also never seen him when, despite his worn coat and frayed linen, he had not stood out among all others as more distinguished than the most noticeable of them. When he walked down a street, people turned to look at him, even oftener than they turned to look at Marco. The boy felt as if it was not merely because he was a big man with a handsome dark face, but because he looked somehow as if he had been born to command armies, and as if no one would think of disobeying him. Yet Marco had never seen him command anyone, and they had always been poor and shabbily dressed, and often enough ill-fed. But whether they were in one country or another, and whatsoever dark place they seemed to be hiding in, the few people they saw treated him with a sort of deference, and nearly always stood when they were in his presence, unless he bade them sit down. It is because they know he is a patriot, and patriots are respected, the boy had told himself. He himself wished to be a patriot, though he had never seen his own country of Samavia. He knew it well, however. His father had talked to him about it ever since that day when he had made the promises. He had taught him to know it by helping him to study curious detailed maps of it, maps of its cities, maps of its mountains, maps of its roads. He had told him stories of the wrongs done its people, of their sufferings and struggles for liberty, and above all, of their unconquerable courage. When they talked together of its history, Marco's boy blood burned and leapt in his veins, and he always knew by the look in his father's eyes that his blood burned also. His countrymen had been killed, they had been robbed, they had died by thousands of cruelties and starvation, but their souls had never been conquered, and through all the years during which more powerful nations crushed and enslaved them, they never ceased to struggle to free themselves and stand unfettered as Samavians had stood centuries before. "Why do we not live there?" Marco had cried on the day the promises were made. "Why do we not go back and fight? When I am a man, I will be a soldier and die for Samavia." "We are of those who must live for Samavia, working day and night," his father had answered. "Denying ourselves, training our bodies and souls, using our brains, learning the things which are best to be done for our people and our country. Even exiles may be Samavian soldiers. I am one. You must be one." "Are we exiles?" asked Marco. "Yes," was the answer. "But even if we never set foot on Samavian soil, we must give our lives to it. I have given mine since I was 16. I shall give it until I die." "Have you never lived there?" said Marco. A strange look shot across his father's face. "No," he answered, and said no more. Marco, watching him, knew he must not ask the question again. The next words his father said were about the promises. Marco was quite a little fellow at the time, but he understood the solemnity of them, and felt that he was being honored as if he were a man. "When you are a man, you shall know all you wish to know," Lauriston said. "Now you are a child, and your mind must not be burdened. But you must do your part. A child sometimes forgets that words may be dangerous. You must promise never to forget this. Wheresoever you are, if you have playmates, you must remember to be silent about many things. You must not speak of what I do, or of the people who come to see me. You must not mention the things in your life which make it different from the lives of other boys. You must keep in your mind that a secret exists which a chance, foolish word might betray. You are a Samavian, and there have been Samavians who have died 1,000 deaths rather than betray a secret. You must learn to obey without question, as if you were a soldier. Now you must take your oath of allegiance." He rose from his seat and went to a corner of the room. He knelt down, turned back the carpet, lifted a plank, and took something from beneath it. It was a sword, and as he came back to Marco, he drew it from its sheath. The child's strong little body stiffened and drew itself up. His large, deep eyes flashed. He was to take his oath of allegiance upon a sword as if he were a man. He did not know that his small hand opened and shut with a fierce understanding,